My sister Veronica humiliated me at our family barbecue, calling my Honda Civic a poverty mobile in front of everyone. But when her CEO boss recognized my license plate number and realized I was the anonymous whistleblower who'd been feeding him information about her department's massive embezzlement scheme, her entire world came crashing down in less than 5 minutes. Now she's facing federal charges, lost her 6-figure salary, and the whole family knows the truth about who the real failure actually is. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I need to get this off my chest because everyone in my family thinks I'm some kind of vindictive monster, but they have no idea what really happened at that barbecue in Millbrook last month. My name is Evelyn, I'm 34 years old, and I've spent the last 2 years watching my older sister Veronica destroy lives while everyone praised her as the golden child of our family. Let me paint you a picture of what I walked into that sunny Saturday afternoon at my parents' house on Oakwood Drive. The whole extended family was there, aunts, uncles, cousins, even some family friends. My parents, Harold and Beatrice, had been planning this gathering for weeks. It was supposed to be a celebration of Veronica's recent promotion to Senior Financial Director at Pinnacle Industries, one of the biggest accounting firms in our state. I pulled up in my 2019 Honda Civic, a car I'd saved for 2 years to buy outright, no payments, reliable transportation that gets me to my job as a forensic accountant at the state auditor's office every single day. I was actually proud of that car. It represented my independence, my financial responsibility, my practical approach to life. But the moment I stepped out of it, I could feel the judgment radiating from my family members. Veronica was holding court on the back patio, designer heels clicking on the stone tiles, waving around a glass of expensive wine that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. She was wearing this cream-colored blazer that I later found out cost $800, more than most people spend on rent. Her perfectly styled blonde hair caught the sunlight as she gestured dramatically, telling everyone about her latest business triumph. "Oh, look, everyone," she announced with that fake sweet voice she'd perfected since high school. "Evelyn finally made it. And in her little economy car, how practical." The way she said practical made it sound like a disease. I tried to laugh it off, you know. I walked over with the potato salad I'd made, homemade by the way, not store-bought like half the dishes on that table, and said, "Hey Veronica, good to see you too." But she wasn't done. Oh no, she was just getting started. "I was just telling everyone about the new Lexus I'm considering," she continued, her voice carrying across the entire patio so everyone could hear. "The dealer said I could probably get whatever I want with my salary. It's amazing what happens when you actually apply yourself in life, you know." That stung. Really stung. Because here's what nobody in my family understood. I made decent money. Not Veronica-level money, sure, but I wasn't struggling. I chose the Honda because I'm not an idiot with my finances. I choose reliability over flash, substance over show. But in my family, appearance is everything. My cousin Rachel, Veronica's biggest cheerleader, chimed in with, "Veronica, you've always been so ambitious. Remember when we were kids and Evelyn wanted to be a teacher while you were already talking about business school?" "Some people are just born with drive," Veronica replied, looking directly at me. "Others are content with settling." I felt my face getting hot, not just from embarrassment, but from rage. Because, see, there's something my family didn't know about Veronica's meteoric rise at Pinnacle Industries. There's something they didn't know about where all that money for designer clothes and luxury car shopping was really coming from. "Well," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "we all have different priorities. Some of us prefer to earn our money honestly." The patio went quiet for just a second. Veronica's eyes narrowed, but then she laughed. This high, tinkling sound that made my skin crawl. "Of course, Evelyn. I'm sure auditing small businesses is very fulfilling work. So important." The sarcasm was thick enough to cut with a knife. My Uncle Pete, always the peacemaker, tried to change the subject. "Hey, Veronica, didn't you say your boss might stop by today? That's exciting." "Oh, yes." Veronica's face lit up like a Christmas tree. "James Thornfield. He's the CEO of Pinnacle. He lives just a few neighborhoods over, and said he might swing by to meet the family. Can you imagine? Having the CEO of a Fortune 500 company at our little family barbecue." She was practically glowing with pride, and I watched my parents beam with reflected glory. This was their successful daughter, the one who'd made it big, the one who brought prestige to the family name. But here's what none of them knew. I'd been working on a case involving Pinnacle Industries for 8 months. Anonymous tips had been coming into our office about financial irregularities in their accounting department. False invoices, inflated expense reports, money being funneled through shell companies. The kind of white-collar crime that ruins companies and destroys pension funds. And the anonymous tipster? Someone with inside knowledge. Someone who'd been carefully documenting evidence and feeding it to law enforcement through encrypted channels. Someone who'd been using a very specific identifier in all their communications. A license plate number that served as their anonymous signature. The same license plate number that was currently sitting in my parents' driveway on my poverty-mobile Honda Civic. I stood there on that patio listening to my sister mock my car, my job, my life choices, while knowing that in her designer purse was probably another burner phone she used to coordinate the very crimes I'd been investigating. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. "You know what, Veronica?" I said finally, setting down my potato salad with perhaps a little more force than necessary. "You're absolutely right. We do have very different approaches to success. I prefer mine to be sustainable." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, here we go. St. Evelyn with her moral superiority complex." That's when we heard the doorbell ring. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Before I tell you what happened when that doorbell rang, you need to understand how Veronica and I got to this point. Because we weren't always enemies. Once upon a time, we were actually close. Or at least, I thought we were. Growing up in Millbrook, Veronica was everything I wasn't. 3 years older, naturally charismatic, the kind of person who could walk into any room and immediately become the center of attention. I was the quiet one, the bookworm, the one who preferred solving puzzles to playing social games. But for the longest time, that worked for us. When we were kids, Veronica actually protected me. I remember in middle school when Brandon Kelly was bullying me about my thick glasses and hand-me-down clothes, Veronica marched right up to him during lunch and told him if he ever looked at me wrong again, she'd make sure everyone knew he still slept with a nightlight. The bullying stopped immediately. "Nobody messes with my little sister except me," she'd joke, ruffling my hair. And back then, it felt like love. We shared a bedroom until I was 14, and some of my best memories are of us staying up late, whispering about our dreams for the future. Veronica wanted to be rich and famous. She wasn't shy about it. She'd practice acceptance speeches in our mirror, thanking imaginary audiences for imaginary awards. She wanted the big house, the fancy car, the designer clothes, the whole package. I wanted to help people. I know that sounds naive now, but I genuinely dreamed of being someone who made a difference. At first, I thought I'd be a teacher like my 4th grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson, who made learning feel like magic. Later, when I discovered how much I loved math and solving problems, I thought maybe I'd be an accountant who helped small businesses succeed. "You're going to save the world one spreadsheet at a time," Veronica would tease. But it wasn't mean-spirited back then. She seemed genuinely proud of my academic achievements, especially when I graduated valedictorian and got a full scholarship to Riverside University. The problem started when we both hit our 20s. Veronica went to business school at Hampton College. Not because she got a scholarship, but because our parents took out a second mortgage to pay for it. She graduated with decent grades and big expectations, but the job market was tough. She bounced between 3 different entry-level positions in 2 years, always complaining that she was too smart for the work, too talented to be stuck doing grunt work. Meanwhile, I was thriving. I'd graduated with my accounting degree and immediately got hired by the state auditor's office. The work was challenging, meaningful, and I was good at it, really good. Within 2 years, I'd been promoted twice and was leading my own investigations into financial fraud cases. That's when things between us started to shift. I'll never forget Thanksgiving, 2019, the last time our relationship felt truly normal. Veronica had just gotten hired at Pinnacle Industries as a junior financial analyst, and she was over the moon about it, not because of the work itself, but because of what it represented: prestige, potential, a foot in the door at a company that mattered. "This is it, Evie," she said, using the childhood nickname she'd abandoned years earlier. "This is my ticket to everything I've ever wanted. Pinnacle Industries doesn't hire just anyone. They saw something special in me." I was genuinely happy for her. I hugged her tight and told her I was proud of her, and I meant it. My little sister was finally getting her shot at the success she'd always craved. But success at Pinnacle came with a price I didn't understand at the time. The first red flag was the clothes. Within 6 months of starting at Pinnacle, Veronica's wardrobe transformed completely. Gone were the modest business outfits from Target and Macy's. Suddenly she was wearing brands I'd only seen in magazines. Saint Laurent, Prada, designer pieces that cost more than my monthly rent. When I asked her about it, she laughed it off. "I have to dress for the job I want, not the job I have. Image is everything in corporate finance, Evie. You wouldn't understand." The second red flag was the attitude. The sister who used to call me for advice on everything from boy troubles to career decisions suddenly treated me like I was beneath her notice. Family dinners became performances where she'd dominate the conversation with stories about important clients, expensive business lunches, and the incredible opportunities opening up for her at Pinnacle. "Veronica's really making something of herself," our father would say with obvious pride. "She's got the killer instinct for business." Our mother would nod enthusiastically. "She's always been our ambitious one. Some children are just born with that drive to succeed." The implication was clear. I wasn't. Despite my steady promotions, my meaningful work, my financial stability and independence, I was somehow the disappointing daughter because I drove a sensible car and shopped at reasonable stores. The third red flag was the secrecy. Veronica stopped talking about the actual work she was doing at Pinnacle. Before, she'd complained endlessly about boring tasks and demanding bosses. Now everything was, quote, confidential client information, or sensitive corporate matters. She became guarded about her phone, taking calls in private and stepping away from family gatherings to handle urgent business. But I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe this was just what success looked like. Maybe I was jealous, like everyone seemed to think. Maybe Veronica had simply outgrown our relationship, and I needed to accept that we were moving in different directions. The breaking point came last Christmas. Veronica arrived at our parents' house driving a brand new BMW, not leased, purchased outright. She was wearing a coat that I later looked up online and discovered cost $3,000. When I asked her how she could afford such luxuries on her salary, she gave me a cold smile. "I'm very good at what I do, Evelyn. Some of us know how to make our money work for us, instead of just sitting in a savings account earning pennies." But I knew what junior financial analysts made at companies like Pinnacle. I'd done my research. Even with bonuses and raises, her lifestyle didn't add up. The math simply didn't work. That's when I started paying attention to the anonymous tips coming into our office about Pinnacle Industries. That's when I realized my sister might be hiding something much bigger than just a shopping addiction. And that's when I made the decision that would eventually lead us to that barbecue confrontation, with James Thornfield about to ring the doorbell and recognize the license plate of the anonymous whistleblower who'd been helping build a case against his own company. The sister who once protected me from middle school bullies was about to discover that I'd become something much more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. The moment that changed everything between Veronica and me happened on a rainy Tuesday night in March, 8 months before that fateful barbecue. I was working late at the state auditor's office, buried in spreadsheets and financial records, when my supervisor, Rebecca Martinez, knocked on my cubicle wall. "Evelyn, I need you to take lead on something sensitive," she said, glancing around to make sure we weren't being overheard. "We've been receiving anonymous tips about potential embezzlement at a major corporation here in the state. The information is detailed, specific, and if it's accurate, we're looking at millions in stolen funds." She handed me a thick manila folder marked Confidential Pinnacle Industries Investigation. My stomach dropped. I stared at the folder for a long moment, feeling like the universe was playing some kind of cosmic joke on me. Of all the companies in the state, of all the investigators in our office, somehow I'd been assigned to look into my own sister's workplace. "Rebecca, I should probably mention that my sister works at Pinnacle Industries," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Would that be a conflict of interest?" Rebecca frowned, considering this. "What department?" "Financial analysis. She's been there about 2 years now." "The tips specifically mention irregularities in the financial analysis department," Rebecca said slowly. "But unless your sister is directly implicated, your inside knowledge of the company culture might actually be helpful. Can you maintain professional objectivity?" I nodded, though my heart was racing. "Absolutely. If there's fraud happening, it needs to be investigated regardless of who's involved." What I didn't tell Rebecca was that I was already suspicious about Veronica's sudden wealth. What I didn't say was that I'd been lying awake at night, wondering how my sister could afford a lifestyle that seemed completely out of reach on her salary. What I couldn't admit was that part of me was relieved to finally have a legitimate reason to dig into what was really going on. "Good," Rebecca said. "The anonymous source has been incredibly thorough. Bank records, expense reports, email communications. They're essentially building our case for us. Whoever this person is, they have extensive access to internal documents, and they know exactly what constitutes evidence of financial crimes." That night, I took the file home and spread everything across my kitchen table. What I found made my blood run cold. The anonymous tipster had documented a sophisticated embezzlement scheme involving false invoices, inflated expense reports, and money being funneled through a network of shell companies. The scheme had been running for at least 18 months and involved multiple employees in the financial analysis department. Conservative estimates put the total theft at over $2 million. But what really shook me was how intimately familiar the tipster seemed to be with the day-to-day operations of Veronica's specific department. They knew meeting schedules, internal project codes, even the coffee preferences of various managers. This wasn't someone on the outside looking in. This was someone with deep, daily access to the very office where my sister worked. The evidence was damning and detailed. Screenshots of internal communications discussing, quote, special projects and, quote, alternative accounting methods. Copies of invoices for services that were never rendered. Bank statements showing deposits into personal accounts that had no legitimate business purpose. I spent the next 3 weeks diving deeper into the investigation, following paper trails and cross-referencing financial records. The more I uncovered, the more sophisticated and brazen the scheme became. These weren't small-time crimes of opportunity. This was organized, systematic theft on a massive scale. During this time, Veronica and I had our monthly sister dinner at Rossetti's Italian restaurant downtown. It was a tradition we'd maintained even as our relationship had grown more strained, the last remnant of our once close bond. Usually, these dinners were exercises in patience for me, listening to Veronica brag about her latest purchases or complain about coworkers who didn't appreciate her talents. But that night was different. That night, I was studying her like evidence in a case file. "You seem distracted," Veronica said, twirling pasta around her fork with practiced elegance. She was wearing a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. "Work stress?" "Just a complicated case," I replied, watching her carefully. Financial fraud investigation. It's amazing how creative people can get when they're stealing money. Veronica's fork paused for just a fraction of a second before she continued eating. Sounds boring. I can't imagine spending my days chasing down petty criminals over a few missing dollars. It's not petty when we're talking about millions, I said. And these aren't desperate people stealing to survive. These are educated professionals who know exactly what they're doing and think they're too smart to get caught. Well, Veronica said with a laugh that sounded slightly forced, I'm sure you'll figure it out. You always were good at solving puzzles. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of unease that made my investigator instincts perk up. She changed the subject quickly, launching into a story about her latest promotion opportunity and how impressed her bosses were with her quote, innovative approaches to financial management. The pieces started falling into place over the following weeks. I began comparing the timeline of Veronica's lifestyle changes with the timeline of the embezzlement scheme documented by our anonymous source. Her new wardrobe, the expensive dinners, the luxury purchases, they all coincided perfectly with the period when money had started disappearing from Pinnacle Industries. But I told myself I was being paranoid. I was looking for connections that weren't there because I was too close to the situation. My sister might be materialistic and status-obsessed, but she wasn't a criminal. She was ambitious, not corrupt. Then I received a package at my office that changed everything. It arrived on a Thursday morning with no return address, just my name written in block letters across a plain manila envelope. Inside was a USB drive and a note written in the same anonymous style as all the previous tips. Final evidence package. License plate verification. HVN 847. This should be sufficient for prosecution. The USB drive contained the smoking gun we'd been looking for, detailed financial records showing exactly how the stolen money had been moved through various accounts, including bank statements for accounts I didn't recognize but which contained deposits that matched the amounts missing from Pinnacle Industries. But it was the license plate reference that made my hand shake as I read the note. HVN 847, those weren't random numbers and letters. They were my license plate number, the same plates that had been on my Honda Civic for the past 2 years. Our anonymous source had been using my license plate as their signature, their way of verifying their identity across multiple communications. But I had never sent any tips to our office. I had never been inside Pinnacle Industries. I had never had access to any of the internal documents that had been provided as evidence, which meant someone else was using my license plate number as their anonymous identifier. Someone who knew me well enough to know my car, but who wanted to create a connection between themselves and me without revealing their true identity. Someone who might be trying to set me up as the source of the leaks. Or someone who trusted me enough to use my identity as a shield while they brought down their own company from the inside. I sat in my office cubicle, staring at that note, and realized that everything I thought I knew about this case was about to be turned upside down. The anonymous tipster wasn't some random employee with a conscience. They were someone with intimate knowledge of my life, someone who had chosen to involve me in their whistleblowing scheme, whether I wanted to be involved or not. And the most terrifying part was that I was starting to suspect I knew exactly who they were. The same person who had been asking me casual questions about my work for months. The same person who knew my schedule, my license plate number, my commitment to investigating financial crimes. The same person whose lifestyle had changed dramatically right around the time this embezzlement scheme had begun. My sister Veronica. But was she the criminal or the whistleblower? Was she stealing millions of dollars or risking everything to expose the theft? And why was she using my identity to hide her involvement either way? I had 48 hours to decide whether to turn over this final evidence package to my supervisor, knowing that it would trigger arrests and federal charges for everyone involved. 48 hours to figure out whether my sister was the hero or the villain in this story. 48 hours before everything between us would be destroyed forever, regardless of which side of the law she was actually on. Those 48 hours turned into the most agonizing 2 days of my life. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything except the impossible choice I was facing. Do I turn over evidence that could destroy my sister's life? Or do I compromise my professional integrity and potentially let criminals escape justice? But then fate made the decision for me in the worst possible way. It was Friday afternoon when my phone rang. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of Riverside Medical Center, staring at the USB drive in my hands and trying to work up the courage to either destroy it or deliver it to Rebecca. The caller ID showed Millbrook General Hospital. Ms. Whitmore, this is Dr. Angela Foster. I'm calling about your father, Harold Whitmore. He's been brought into our emergency department following a severe heart attack. You're listed as his emergency contact. The world tilted sideways. The USB drive slipped from my numb fingers and clattered to the floor of my car. Is he? How bad is it? He's stable for now, but it was a significant cardiac event. We need to perform emergency surgery within the next few hours. I need you and your family here as soon as possible. I drove to the hospital in a daze, my mind racing between images of my father lying unconscious in a hospital bed and the evidence of massive corporate fraud sitting in my office files. When I arrived, I found my mother Beatrice in the waiting room, clutching a tissue and looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. "Oh, Evelyn," she sobbed when she saw me. "I don't know what happened. He was just mowing the lawn, and then he collapsed." Mrs. Henderson next door called the ambulance. "Where's Veronica?" I asked, scanning the waiting room. "She's on her way back from a business conference in Portland. Her flight doesn't land until tomorrow morning." Mom grabbed my hands with trembling fingers. "The doctor said the next 24 hours are critical. If the surgery goes well, he might, but if it doesn't..." She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. "My father might die, and Veronica wouldn't even be here." Dr. Foster explained that Dad had suffered a massive myocardial infarction, what she called a widowmaker heart attack. The main artery to his heart was completely blocked, and he needed immediate bypass surgery to survive. Even if the surgery was successful, his recovery would be long and uncertain. "The good news is that your father is relatively young and was in decent health before this incident," Dr. Foster said, trying to be reassuring. "But I won't lie to you. This is a serious situation. The next few days will tell us a lot about his long-term prognosis." As I sat in that sterile waiting room, watching my mother fall apart while my father fought for his life in surgery, the embezzlement investigation suddenly seemed insignificant. What did corporate fraud matter when my family was crumbling? What did professional integrity matter when I might lose my father? But then Monday morning arrived, and with it a phone call that shattered any hope I had of keeping my personal and professional lives separate. "Evelyn, we have a problem." Rebecca's voice was tense when I answered my phone from the hospital cafeteria. "The Pinnacle Industries case just became urgent. We received another anonymous tip overnight, and this one contains information about an imminent document destruction scheduled for this week." My blood ran cold. "Document destruction?" "According to our source, someone at Pinnacle has figured out that they're under investigation. They're planning to destroy all evidence of the embezzlement scheme before we can obtain search warrants. If we don't move in the next 48 hours, we'll lose everything." I felt trapped between two impossible situations. My father was still in intensive care, my mother needed me there for support, and Veronica was flying back that afternoon to deal with the family crisis. This was literally the worst possible time for me to be leading a major fraud investigation. "Rebecca, I need to tell you something," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "My father had a heart attack Friday night. He's in the ICU, and I don't know if I can handle this case right now." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Evelyn, I'm so sorry. Of course, family comes first. But here's the problem. You're the only investigator who's familiar with all the details of this case. If we hand it off to someone else now, they'll need at least a week to get up to speed, and by then, all the evidence will be gone. Can't we get emergency warrants? Move faster?" We tried. The judge wants more documentation before he'll authorize raids on a Fortune 500 company. He needs our complete case file, all our evidence analysis, and a detailed briefing on why immediate action is necessary. You're the only one who can provide that. I closed my eyes and leaned against the cafeteria wall. How long do I have? The briefing is scheduled for Wednesday morning. If you can get everything ready by then, we can execute search warrants Wednesday afternoon. But if we miss this window, the evidence disappears and the criminals get away with it, I finished. Exactly. I spent the next 36 hours living in two worlds simultaneously. During the day, I was at the hospital, holding my mother's hand while we waited for updates on Dad's condition. The bypass surgery had been successful, but he was still sedated and on a ventilator. Dr. Foster was cautiously optimistic, but stressed that the next few days would be crucial for his recovery. During the nights, I was in my home office, working frantically to compile everything needed for the judge's briefing. Financial records, timeline analysis, evidence authentication. Everything had to be perfect because we would only get one chance to convince the judge that immediate action was necessary. Veronica arrived Tuesday afternoon, stepping into the ICU waiting room like a whirlwind of expensive perfume and designer clothes. Even in the middle of a family crisis, she looked like she'd stepped out of a business magazine. Her first words weren't about Dad's condition. They were about the inconvenience this was causing her work schedule. I had to cancel 3 important meetings to fly back here, she said, settling into the uncomfortable waiting room chair with obvious displeasure. My boss wasn't happy about the short notice. Dad almost died, Veronica, I said, barely able to keep the anger out of my voice. Almost died but didn't, she replied coolly. The doctor said he's stable now. There's no point in everyone sitting around here looking miserable. I'll take the night shift so you can go home and get some rest. You look terrible. I wanted to argue, but I desperately needed those hours at home to finish preparing the case file. So I left my sister at the hospital and drove home to work on the investigation that might end up destroying her life. That's when I found the note. It was slipped under my front door, written in the same block letters as all the previous anonymous communications. They know about the investigation. Document destruction starts tomorrow night. This is our last chance. Trust me. HVN 847. I stared at that note for a long time, my hands shaking. Our anonymous source, whoever was using my license plate as their signature, was telling me that we were running out of time. But they were also asking me to trust them, and I still had no idea who they were or what their real agenda was. The most terrifying possibility was that it was Veronica herself, using my identity to expose crimes she was either committing or witnessing. If she was the whistleblower, then she was risking everything to bring down corrupt colleagues. But if she was one of the criminals, then she might be trying to manipulate the investigation to protect herself while throwing others under the bus. Either way, Wednesday morning's briefing would determine whether my sister ended up as a hero or in federal prison. And I was the one who had to decide whether to present evidence that could destroy her life while our father lay unconscious in the hospital. As I sat in my kitchen at 2 a.m., surrounded by financial records and legal documents, I realized that there was no good choice anymore. No matter what I decided, someone I loved was going to get hurt. The only question was whether I could live with myself afterward. The anonymous source was right about one thing. This was our last chance. But it might also be the last time my family was ever whole again. Wednesday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood perfectly. I'd managed maybe 3 hours of sleep, and my presentation materials were spread across the passenger seat of my Honda Civic as I drove to the courthouse for the judge's briefing. My phone had been buzzing all morning with updates from the hospital. Dad was awake but weak, and the doctors were cautiously optimistic about his recovery. The briefing with Judge Patricia Caldwell went better than I'd hoped. She was thorough but fair, asking pointed questions about our evidence and the urgency of our timeline. After 2 hours of detailed presentation, She agreed to sign the search warrants for Pinnacle Industries, authorizing raids to begin at 2 p.m. that afternoon. "Ms. Whitmore," Judge Caldwell said as she signed the final documents, "this is impressive investigative work. Your anonymous source has provided us with an airtight case. Whoever they are, they've essentially gift-wrapped this prosecution for us." I nodded, trying to ignore the knot of dread forming in my stomach. In less than 4 hours, federal agents would be descending on Pinnacle Industries, seizing computers, financial records, and arresting anyone connected to the embezzlement scheme, including, potentially, my own sister. I drove straight from the courthouse to the hospital, needing to see my father before the world potentially exploded around our family. Mom was in Dad's room, holding his hand while he dozed fitfully. He looked so fragile, connected to all those monitors and machines, nothing like the strong, steady man who'd raised us. "How's he doing?" I whispered, kissing Mom's forehead. "Better," she said with a tired smile. "The doctor thinks he might be able to come home next week if his recovery continues at this pace." Veronica stepped out to take a business call. Apparently there's some crisis at her office. My blood turned to ice. What kind of crisis? She didn't say exactly, but she seemed very upset. Something about unexpected audits and missing documents. You know how dramatic she can be about work stress. I excused myself and hurried out to the hospital parking lot, my heart pounding. If Veronica knew about audits and missing documents, then someone at Pinnacle had definitely figured out they were under investigation, which meant our anonymous source had been right. They were destroying evidence, and we'd barely gotten the warrants in time. I found Veronica pacing behind the hospital near the employee entrance, her phone pressed to her ear. She was speaking in hushed, urgent tones, and something about her posture screamed panic. "No, you don't understand," she was saying. "If they find those backup files, we're all finished. You promised me those servers would be wiped by today." I crept closer, using a maintenance shed as cover. My sister's voice carried clearly in the damp air. "I don't care about your technical difficulties, Derek. I've been feeding information to the state auditors for months to stay ahead of this investigation. But if they discover the extent of what we've been doing..." She paused, listening to whoever Derek was. Yes, I know it was risky using my sister's license plate as my signature, but I needed them to trust the source. Evelyn's reputation gave my tips credibility. The world stopped spinning. I grabbed the edge of the maintenance shed to keep from falling over as the full horror of what I was hearing sank in. My sister wasn't just involved in the embezzlement scheme, she was one of the masterminds. And she'd been using me, manipulating the investigation by posing as a whistleblower, while actually trying to control what evidence we found. She'd been feeding us information not to expose the crimes, but to make sure we only discovered what she wanted us to discover. "Look, Derek," Veronica continued, oblivious to my presence, "I've been very careful about what information I've shared with the auditors. They think they're investigating a simple embezzlement scheme involving a few junior employees. They have no idea about the larger money laundering operation or our connections to the Meridian Group. As long as we can destroy the right documents and make sure the right people disappear, we can let them arrest the fall guys and walk away clean." I felt sick. The Meridian Group was a known organized crime syndicate that federal investigators had been trying to penetrate for years. If Pinnacle Industries was laundering money for them, we weren't just talking about corporate fraud. We were talking about connections to drug trafficking, illegal gambling, and potentially worse crimes. "The federal raids start in 3 hours, Veronica said, checking her expensive watch. "By then, everyone on our list needs to be gone, and every hard drive in the server room needs to be physically destroyed. I don't care what it costs or how suspicious it looks. We clean house today, or we all go to prison for the rest of our lives." She paused again, and I could hear a man's voice on the other end, though I couldn't make out the words. "No, absolutely not," Veronica said sharply. "We are not involving Evelyn any further. She's useful as an unwitting accomplice, but if she discovers the truth about what we're really doing, her conscience will get us all killed. My sister is annoyingly honest. It's her biggest weakness." That stung more than anything else she'd said. Not only had Veronica been using me to cover up massive crimes, but she genuinely believed I was too naive and principled to be trusted with the truth. I was nothing more than a useful tool to her, someone whose reputation she could exploit while laughing at my ignorance behind my back. "I have to get back inside before someone notices I'm missing," Veronica said. "Just make sure everything is handled by 2 p.m. And Derek? If this goes wrong and the feds trace anything back to us, I don't know you. We've never met. You're on your own." She ended the call and started walking back toward the hospital entrance. I pressed myself against the maintenance shed, heart hammering as she passed within 10 feet of my hiding spot. Once she was gone, I stumbled to my car and sat in the driver's seat, shaking. Everything I thought I knew about my sister, about our relationship, about the investigation I'd been leading, it was all a lie. Veronica wasn't just a materialistic woman who'd gotten in over her head with corporate fraud. She was a calculating criminal who'd been manipulating me for months, using my professional reputation and my trust to protect herself while destroying evidence and helping her co-conspirators escape justice. The anonymous tips, the license plate signature, the perfectly timed information that had built our case. It had all been orchestrated by Veronica to control what we investigated and ensure we never discovered the full scope of their crimes. She'd been playing me like a chess piece, always staying one step ahead, because she knew exactly what evidence we had and what we were planning to do next. I thought about all those family dinners where she'd asked casual questions about my work, all those seemingly innocent inquiries about investigation procedures and timelines, all those moments when I'd trusted her with information about sensitive cases because she was my sister and I never imagined she could be using it against me. But the worst part was realizing that even now, even as federal agents were preparing to raid her company, Veronica thought she was going to get away with it. She believed she'd been clever enough to manipulate the investigations so thoroughly that when arrests started happening, she'd be safely out of reach, while her fall guys took the blame. She had no idea that I was sitting in this parking lot, having heard every word of her phone conversation. She didn't know that her careful manipulation had just collapsed because she'd gotten careless for 5 minutes. I looked at my phone and saw that it was 12:47 p.m. The federal raids would begin in less than an hour and a half. I had just enough time to call Rebecca and tell her that our anonymous source wasn't a heroic whistleblower. They were one of the criminals, and we'd been investigating exactly what they wanted us to investigate while the real crimes continued right under our noses. But first, I had to make a choice that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I could protect my sister by saying nothing and letting her escape with her co-conspirators. Or I could do my job and make sure that justice was served, even if it meant destroying my family forever. As I dialed Rebecca's number, I realized that the sister who had once protected me from middle school bullies had become something I never could have imagined, a criminal who saw me as nothing more than a useful fool to be manipulated and discarded. The person I'd trusted most in the world had been betraying me for months, and I was about to return the favor. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial Rebecca's number. When she answered, I could hear the tension in her voice. She was clearly in the middle of coordinating the federal raids. "Evelyn, please tell me you're calling with good news. We're 30 minutes from executing the warrants, and I need to know everything is in order." "Rebecca, we have a massive problem," I said, my voice barely steady. "Our anonymous source isn't who we think they are. They're not a whistleblower. They're one of the criminals, and they've been manipulating our entire investigation." There was a long pause. "What are you talking about?" I told her everything. The overheard phone conversation, the Meridian Group connections, the planned evidence destruction, and the horrifying realization that my own sister had been orchestrating our investigation to protect herself and her co-conspirators. When I finished, Rebecca was silent for so long I thought the call had dropped. "Jesus Christ, Evelyn, are you absolutely certain about what you heard?" "Every word." She specifically mentioned using my license plate as her signature to give the tips credibility. She talked about making sure we only found evidence of quote, simple embezzlement while hiding the money laundering operation. Rebecca, they're gonna destroy everything and disappear before we can arrest them. Not if I can help it, Rebecca said grimly. I'm calling the federal task force right now. We're moving the raids up to 1:30 p.m., and I'm adding your sister's name to the arrest warrants. Can you get somewhere safe? If she realizes you overheard that conversation. I'm at the hospital with my family. My father is in the ICU recovering from heart surgery. Stay there. Don't let her know you suspect anything. We'll handle this from here. But as I hung up the phone, I realized staying quiet wasn't going to be an option. Veronica was walking back across the parking lot toward my car, and something about her expression told me she'd seen me sitting there. Had she noticed me during her phone call? Did she suspect I'd overheard something? Evelyn, she said, tapping on my window with one perfectly manicured nail. What are you doing out here? I thought you were visiting Dad. I rolled down the window, trying to keep my expression neutral. Just needed some air. Hospital smell was getting to me. How's your work crisis going? Veronica's eyes narrowed slightly. Work crisis? Mom said you got an urgent call about audits and missing documents. Sounded stressful. For just a moment, I saw something flicker across her face. Calculation, wariness, the look of someone trying to figure out how much I knew. But then she smiled, that practiced corporate smile that never quite reached her eyes. Oh, that. Just typical corporate drama. Someone misplaced some quarterly reports, and management is panicking. You know how paranoid executives get about regulatory compliance. She leaned against my car, blocking my view of the parking lot exit. Actually, I'm glad I found you out here. I wanted to talk to you about something important. My mouth went dry. What about? I've been thinking a lot about your career lately, Evie, about how hard you work for such little recognition. State Auditor's Office. It's noble work, sure, but where's it really getting you? You're brilliant with financial analysis, but you're wasting your talents chasing penny ante fraud cases. She was using my childhood nickname again, the one she'd abandoned years ago. Everything about this conversation felt wrong, like she was reading from a script. I love my job, Veronica. I know you do, and that's admirable. But love doesn't pay for Dad's medical bills, does it? I've been looking at the hospital charges, and even with insurance, this is going to be expensive. Really expensive. I stared at her. What are you getting at? I'm getting at the fact that I could help. My company has connections with some very wealthy clients who value discretion and loyalty. People who would pay handsomely for someone with your skills and security clearance to occasionally look the other way when certain irregularities come up during audits. The audacity of it took my breath away. She was trying to recruit me. Even after everything I'd overheard, even knowing that federal agents were probably already moving toward Pinnacle Industries, she was actually trying to corrupt me. You're asking me to take bribes. Veronica laughed, that tinkling sound that had always grated on my nerves. I'm asking you to be practical, to think about your family's needs instead of some abstract notion of justice. Dad's gonna need months of rehabilitation, maybe home nursing care. Mom's gonna need support too. She's not getting any younger. Your little government salary isn't gonna cover all of that. So you want me to become a criminal like you? The words slipped out before I could stop them. Veronica's expression went completely cold, and I realized I'd just made a potentially fatal mistake. Like me, she said quietly. That's an interesting accusation, little sister. What exactly do you think you know about my business practices? My heart was racing, but I couldn't back down now. I know enough. I know about the embezzlement scheme at Pinnacle. I know about the shell companies and the false invoices. I know about the money laundering for the Meridian Group. Veronica went very still. How could you possibly know about any of that? Because I've been investigating your company for months, Veronica. The state auditor's office has been building a case against Pinnacle Industries, and your name is all over the evidence. My name is all over what evidence? She was still speaking quietly, but there was something dangerous in her voice now. Be very specific, Evelyn. Bank records showing transfers to accounts in your name. Email communications about, quote, special projects sent from your work address. Invoice approvals with your digital signature on services that were never rendered. I was improvising now, mixing real evidence with educated guesses, but Veronica's expression told me I was hitting close to the mark. That's impossible, she said, but she didn't sound as confident as before. Any financial irregularities at Pinnacle would have been discovered during our quarterly audits. Our compliance department is very thorough. Your compliance department is part of the scheme, Veronica. The whole financial analysis division is corrupt, and you're one of the ringleaders. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could practically see the gears turning in her head. Was she trying to figure out how much evidence we actually had? Was she calculating whether it would be safer to run or to try to manipulate me further? You know what I think? She said finally. I think you're confused. I think you've been working too hard on some unrelated case, and the stress of Dad's condition is making you paranoid. You're seeing connections that don't exist. I heard your phone conversation, Veronica, 20 minutes ago, behind the maintenance shed. You were talking to someone named Derek about destroying servers and making sure the fall guys take the blame while you escape. For the first time in our entire conversation, Veronica looked genuinely surprised. Then her expression shifted to something I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating fury. You were spying on me. I was trying to figure out why my sister has been lying to me for 2 years about where her money comes from. My money comes from being good at my job, something you've never understood because you've never been ambitious enough to take risks. Your money comes from stealing from corporate accounts and laundering it for organized criminals. That's not ambition, Veronica. That's felony corruption. She laughed again, but this time it sounded harsh and bitter. Felony corruption. You sound like a textbook, Evie. Do you have any idea how naive you are? How utterly clueless about how the real world actually works? Enlighten me. The real world doesn't reward honesty and hard work. It rewards people who are smart enough to see opportunities and bold enough to take them. While you've been playing by the rules and earning your little government paycheck, I've been building real wealth and real power. I've been making connections with people who matter, people who can open doors that your precious integrity will never even show you. People like the Meridian Group? Veronica's eyes flashed dangerously. People who understand that success requires flexibility. People who value results over methods. People who don't waste time worrying about arbitrary legal boundaries when there's money to be made. Arbitrary legal boundaries? Veronica, you're talking about money laundering for organized crime. People get killed when they cross groups like Meridian. People get killed when they're stupid or careless. I'm neither. She leaned closer, and her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But you know what does get people killed, Evelyn? Being a snitch. Being the kind of person who betrays family loyalty for some abstract notion of justice. The threat was unmistakable. My own sister, the person who had once protected me from school bullies, was essentially threatening my life because I'd discovered her crimes. Is that what this is about, family loyalty? Family loyalty is the only thing that matters. Everything else, laws, ethics, professional obligations, those are just obstacles that weak people use as excuses for their failures. Strong people find ways around obstacles. I stared at this woman who looked like my sister but sounded like a stranger. When did you become this person, Veronica? When did you decide that crime was more important than family? I became this person when I realized that being good and honest and following the rules would leave me poor and forgotten like everyone else in our family. You want to know the truth? I'm embarrassed by you, Evelyn. Embarrassed by your little Honda Civic and your government job and your pathetic sense of moral superiority. You could have been part of something bigger, but you're too small-minded to see the opportunity. The cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. This wasn't just about money or crime. This was about fundamental contempt for who I was as a person. But before I could respond, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the screen and her face went pale. "I have to take this," she said, stepping away from my car. I watched her answer the phone, and even from a distance I could see her body language change dramatically. Her shoulders sagged, her free hand went to her forehead, and she started pacing frantically. Something had gone very, very wrong with her carefully laid plans. I watched Veronica pace frantically while talking on her phone, and even from 20 feet away I could see that whatever news she was receiving was catastrophic. Her voice rose to near panic levels, though I couldn't make out the specific words. After about 2 minutes, she ended the call and stood motionless for a moment, staring at her phone like it had just delivered a death sentence. When she walked back to my car, all pretense of control had vanished from her demeanor. Her face was pale, her designer blouse was wrinkled from nervous fidgeting, and her hands were visibly shaking. "We need to talk," she said, her voice completely different from the cold, threatening tone she'd used just minutes earlier. "Right now, somewhere private." "I'm not going anywhere with you, Veronica." "Evelyn, please, you don't understand what's happening." That call was from Derek. The federal agents hit Pinnacle Industries 15 minutes ago. They didn't wait until 2 p.m. like they were supposed to. Someone gave them new information, and they moved up the timeline. I kept my expression neutral, though inside I was relieved that Rebecca had acted so quickly. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because they arrested everyone except me, because I wasn't at the office when they raided it. But they have warrant for my arrest too. My assistant texted me a warning just before they seized her phone." The desperation in her voice was almost palpable. This was not the confident, manipulative woman who'd been trying to recruit me 5 minutes ago. This was someone whose entire world had just collapsed. "So run," I said flatly. "Isn't that what you and Derek planned? Disappear and let your fall guys take the blame?" Veronica stared at me with something approaching horror. "You really did hear everything, didn't you?" "Every word." "Then you know that I can't run. Not without money, not without new identity documents, not without the connections I need to disappear safely." All of that was supposed to be arranged through Derek's contacts, but Derek was arrested in the first wave. His assets are frozen, his accounts are locked, and his quote emergency protocols apparently didn't include contingencies for simultaneous federal raids. I felt a cold satisfaction watching her panic, even though I knew I probably should have felt some sympathy for my sister's situation. But after everything she'd said to me, after all the manipulation and contempt and threats, I found it hard to care about her predicament. "What do you want from me, Veronica?" "I need your help. I need somewhere to stay while I figure out my next move. I need someone to help me access some emergency funds I have hidden in offshore accounts. You need me to become an accessory after the fact to your crimes. I need my sister to help me survive this." Her voice cracked slightly. "Evelyn, they're going to put me in prison for 20 years, maybe longer if they can prove the Meridian Group connections. I'll lose everything. My career, my reputation, my freedom. I'll be a convicted felon for the rest of my life." "You should have thought about that before you decided to become a criminal." Veronica's desperation flared into anger. "Don't you dare judge me. You have no idea what it's like to have real ambition, real dreams that require real money to achieve. You've never wanted anything badly enough to take risks for it. I've never wanted anything badly enough to steal for it." "Stealing?" She laughed bitterly. "You think this was just stealing? Evelyn, I was part of a financial operation that moved over $50 million through carefully structured investment vehicles. I helped create legitimate business opportunities for people who had capital but needed discretion. I facilitated transactions that—" "You laundered money for organized criminals," I interrupted. "You can dress it up in corporate language all you want, but that's what you did. And you know what that $50 million bought me? A life? A real life with real opportunities. While you were living in your tiny apartment driving your sad little Honda, I was building connections with people who control industries. I was positioning myself for opportunities you can't even imagine. The cruel superiority was creeping back into her voice, even in the middle of her crisis. Even facing arrest and imprisonment, she couldn't resist belittling my choices and my life. "Those connections sure are helping you now," I said. "They would have helped me if your investigation hadn't moved so fast. If you people had followed normal procedures instead of rushing to judgment, I would have had time to execute my exit strategy properly." "My investigation?" "Veronica, you were feeding us information. You controlled what we found and when we found it. You manipulated our entire case." "I controlled it up to a point, yes. But then someone gave you additional information that I didn't provide. Someone else was leaking details about our operation, and that forced you to expand your investigation beyond what I could manage." I stared at her, pieces clicking into place. There was another whistleblower. Obviously, someone with access to information I couldn't control. Someone who wanted to see our entire operation exposed. Not just the sanitized version I was feeding you. Who? If I knew that, I wouldn't be in this situation. Veronica's phone buzzed again, and she looked at it with visible dread. My lawyer. God, I can't even afford to pay him once my accounts are frozen. As she answered the call, I sat in my car processing the implications of what she'd just told me. There had been two sources of information in our investigation. Veronica, feeding us controlled leaks to misdirect our attention, and someone else providing the real evidence that had ultimately exposed the full scope of the crimes. But who was the real whistleblower, and why had they waited so long to provide the crucial information that brought down the entire operation? Veronica finished her call and walked back to my window, looking even more desperate than before. My lawyer says I need to turn myself in immediately. If I run, it will only make things worse when they eventually catch me. But he also says that if I cooperate fully with the federal investigation, if I provide information about the Meridian Group's other operations, I might be able to negotiate a reduced sentence. So cooperate. It's not that simple. The people I was working with, they don't tolerate snitches, Evelyn. If I testify against the Meridian Group, I'll need witness protection. I'll have to disappear completely, give up my identity, my career, everything I've worked for. Everything you stole for, I corrected. Everything I built, she shot back. And you know what the real irony is? While I'm losing everything, while my life is being destroyed, you get to be the hero. You get to be the brave investigator who brought down the corruption. You'll probably get commendations, maybe even a promotion. Your career will benefit from my downfall. The bitterness in her voice was toxic. Even facing the consequences of her own criminal choices, she resented the fact that I might receive recognition for doing my job honestly. I didn't choose to investigate your company, Veronica. I was assigned the case. But you chose to pursue it when you realized I was involved. You could have recused yourself, claimed a conflict of interest, let someone else handle it. But you didn't, because you saw an opportunity to prove you were better than me. I pursued it because crimes were being committed and people needed to be held accountable. People like your own sister. Especially people like my own sister. The words came out harder than I'd intended, but I meant them. You think family loyalty means protecting criminals? You think I should have let you steal millions of dollars just because we share DNA? I think family loyalty means not destroying your sister's life to advance your own career. The accusation stung, partly because there was a tiny grain of truth in it. Had I been more aggressive in pursuing this case because it involved Veronica? Had some part of me wanted to prove that my moral choices were superior to her materialistic ones? But even if that was true, it didn't change the fundamental facts. Veronica had committed serious crimes. She had stolen money, laundered funds for organized criminals, and manipulated a federal investigation. She had threatened me when I discovered the truth, and even now she was more concerned about her own losses than the harm she'd caused to others. Your life wasn't destroyed by my investigation, Veronica. It was destroyed by your decisions. Every choice you made, the embezzlement, the money laundering, the manipulation, those were your choices. You destroyed your own life. My choices gave me a life worth living, she replied. Your choices gave you a Honda Civic and a government pension. Even in the face of total ruin, she couldn't let go of her contempt for my values and my lifestyle. The designer clothes, the luxury purchases, the connections with wealthy criminals. Even knowing that all of it was built on theft and corruption, she still believed it was superior to the honest life I'd chosen. You know what, Veronica? You're right about one thing. My choices did give me a Honda Civic and a government pension. They also gave me something you'll never have. The ability to look at myself in the mirror without shame. She stared at me for a long moment, and for just an instant, I thought I saw something break behind her eyes. But then the hardness returned. Enjoy your moral superiority, Evelyn. I hope it keeps you warm when you're 65 and still living paycheck to paycheck. With that, she turned and walked away, pulling out her phone to call someone else who might be willing to help her navigate the destruction of her carefully constructed criminal life. I watched her go, knowing that this was probably the last conversation we'd ever have as sisters. In a few hours, she'd be in federal custody. Within a few months, she'd likely be in federal prison. And our family would have to find a way to process the fact that their golden child, their success story, their pride and joy, was actually a convicted felon who had chosen crime over family, money over morality, and selfishness over everything else that should have mattered. As I sat there in my sad little Honda, I realized that for the first time in years I felt genuinely sorry for Veronica. Not because she was facing justice for her crimes, but because she had become someone so fundamentally corrupted that she couldn't even recognize the value of the life she was losing. I sat in my car for another 10 minutes after Veronica walked away, trying to process everything that had just happened. My phone kept buzzing with updates from Rebecca about the federal raids, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. I needed to get back inside to check on Dad, but I also dreaded facing my family knowing what I now knew about Veronica. When I finally made it back to Dad's ICU room, I found my mother and Uncle Pete clustered around his bed, speaking in hushed, worried tones. Dad was awake but looked exhausted, and Mom's face was streaked with tears that had nothing to do with his medical condition. "Evelyn, thank God you're back," Mom said, rushing over to grab my hands. "Something terrible has happened. The police came looking for Veronica. They said there are federal charges against her for embezzlement and money laundering. It has to be some kind of mistake." Uncle Pete shook his head grimly. "Beatrice, I saw the news footage of them raiding Pinnacle Industries. This isn't a mistake. They arrested a dozen people, seized computers, the whole 9 yards. This is serious." "But Veronica would never." Mom's voice trailed off as she looked at me. "Evelyn, you work in financial investigation. You would know if something like this was legitimate, right? Tell me this is all some bureaucratic error that can be cleared up." I felt trapped between my professional obligations and my mother's desperate need for reassurance. How could I tell her that not only were the charges legitimate, but that I had been personally involved in building the case against my own sister? "Mom, if federal agents are involved, it means they have substantial evidence. These kinds of investigations don't happen without proof of serious crimes." "Substantial evidence of what?" Dad asked weakly from his hospital bed. His voice was raspy from the ventilator, but his eyes were alert and focused. "What exactly is Veronica accused of doing?" Before I could answer, my Aunt Caroline burst into the room, her face flushed with anger and indignation. "Have you all seen the news?" she demanded, waving her phone in the air. "They're saying Veronica is part of some organized crime money laundering scheme. They're calling her a key figure in a $50 million fraud operation. This is insane." "It has to be false," Mom insisted. "Veronica works in financial analysis. She helps companies with their accounting. She's not a criminal." Caroline nodded vigorously. "Exactly. I've been telling everyone who will listen that this is obviously a case of mistaken identity or prosecutorial overreach. The government loves to go after successful business people because they're jealous of anyone who's made something of themselves." I stared at my aunt in disbelief. Caroline, if the FBI has enough evidence to make arrests, it's not prosecutorial overreach. Oh, please, Caroline scoffed. You work for the government, Evelyn. Of course you're going to defend them. But some of us live in the real world, where we know that federal agencies target successful people to make themselves look important. This isn't about targeting successful people. This is about investigating financial crimes. Financial crimes, Caroline repeated mockingly. You mean creative accounting? You mean finding innovative ways to help clients maximize their investments? Since when is being good at business a crime? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Caroline was literally defending money laundering as creative accounting and innovative investment strategies. She was so invested in the image of Veronica as the family success story that she couldn't accept the possibility that her success had been built on criminal activity. Caroline, Uncle Pete said gently, maybe we should wait to hear all the facts before we assume the government is wrong. The facts? Caroline's voice rose sharply. The fact is that Veronica has been the most successful member of this family for years. The fact is that she's worked harder and achieved more than any of us. The fact is that jealous people always try to tear down anyone who rises above their station. She looked directly at me when she said that last part, and the implication was clear. I was one of the jealous people trying to tear down Veronica's success. I'm not jealous of criminal behavior, I said quietly. Criminal behavior? My cousin Jennifer had just arrived, and apparently caught the tail end of our conversation. Are we talking about Veronica? Because I just got off the phone with my friend Lisa, who works in corporate law, and she says these federal investigations are almost always politically motivated. They target successful women in business because it makes good headlines. I felt like I was in some kind of alternate reality where everyone was determined to rewrite obvious facts to protect their preferred narrative about Veronica. Jennifer, this isn't about politics or gender discrimination. This is about evidence of specific crimes. What evidence? Mom asked desperately. What could they possibly have that would make them think our Veronica is involved in something illegal? I opened my mouth to explain about the bank records, the false invoices, the shell companies, but then I realized I couldn't reveal any details about an ongoing federal investigation. I was bound by professional ethics and legal obligations not to discuss the evidence we'd gathered. I can't discuss the specifics of the investigation, I said finally. Can't or won't? Caroline asked suspiciously. Because it seems awfully convenient that you're suddenly unable to defend your sister when she needs family support the most. I'm not defending or attacking anyone. I'm just saying that federal investigations aren't based on speculation or political motivations. They're based on evidence. Evidence that could be fabricated, Jennifer said. Evidence that could be misinterpreted by investigators who don't understand complex financial transactions. Evidence that could be planted by competitors trying to destroy Pinnacle Industries, Caroline added. Corporate espionage is a real thing, you know. Dad, who had been listening to this entire conversation from his hospital bed, finally spoke up. Stop. All of you, just stop. The room went quiet. Despite his weakened condition, Dad's voice still carried the authority that had commanded respect throughout our childhood. Our daughter is facing serious federal charges, he said slowly. Our family is in crisis. And instead of coming together to figure out how to help her, we're standing around arguing about whether the charges are legitimate. Harold, of course we want to help her, Mom said. But we need to understand what's really happening. What's really happening, Dad said, looking directly at me, is that Evelyn knows more about this situation than she's telling us, and I want to know why. I felt every eye in the room focus on me. My father, despite his medical condition, had always been perceptive about family dynamics. He'd obviously sensed that my responses weren't just professional caution, they were personal knowledge. Dad, I can't discuss details of ongoing federal investigations. It would be illegal for me to share confidential information, even with family. But you are involved in the investigation, he said. It wasn't a question. I hesitated for a moment too long, and that hesitation told him everything he needed to know. My God, Mom whispered. Evelyn, are you investigating your own sister? I was assigned to investigate Pinnacle Industries. I didn't know Veronica was involved when the case began. The room erupted in shocked exclamations and angry accusations. Caroline immediately started yelling about conflicts of interest and family betrayal. Jennifer demanded to know how I could participate in destroying my sister's life. Mom started crying and asking how this was possible. But it was Uncle Pete who asked the question that cut to the heart of everything. Evelyn, do you believe the charges against Veronica are true? Everyone went silent, waiting for my answer. I looked around the room at these people who had loved Veronica, supported her, celebrated her success, and invested their family pride in her achievements. I looked at my mother, who was still clinging to the hope that this was all a terrible mistake. I looked at my father, lying weak and vulnerable in his hospital bed, facing the possibility that his daughter was a criminal. Yes, I said quietly, I believe the charges are true. The explosion of anger that followed was immediate and overwhelming. Caroline accused me of jealousy and professional ambition. Jennifer said I was destroying the family out of spite. Mom sobbed that I was betraying my own sister for career advancement. How can you do this to her? Mom cried. How can you side with strangers against your own blood? I'm not siding with anyone, Mom. I'm telling you what the evidence shows. Evidence you helped gather, Caroline spat. Evidence you probably twisted to make Veronica look guilty because you've always resented her success. That's not true. Isn't it? Jennifer joined in. You've always been jealous of Veronica, jealous of her career, her confidence, her achievements, and now you finally found a way to tear her down. I would never. Never what? Caroline interrupted. Never betray your own sister? Because that's exactly what you're doing. The accusations kept coming, each one more painful than the last. In their minds, I had become the villain of this story. I was the jealous sister who had destroyed Veronica out of spite and ambition. I was the family traitor who had chosen career advancement over loyalty. Not one of them asked whether Veronica might actually be guilty. Not one of them considered the possibility that I might be struggling with this situation too. Not one of them wondered whether I might be just as devastated as they were to discover that the sister I'd loved and trusted had been living a lie for years. In their narrative, Veronica was the victim and I was the betrayer, and no amount of evidence or explanation was going to change their minds. As I stood there listening to my family tear me apart for doing my job and telling the truth, I realized that Veronica had been right about one thing. I was about to lose everything too. Not my career or my freedom, but something equally precious, my family's love and respect. While Veronica faced federal prison, I faced something that might be even more painful in the long run, becoming the family outcast, forever marked as the sister who destroyed our golden child's life. I left the hospital that evening feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. The drive home in my Honda Civic, the same car that had started this whole nightmare when Veronica mocked it at the barbecue just weeks ago, felt like traveling through a fog of disbelief. My own family had essentially disowned me for telling the truth about crimes I'd discovered through my job. When I got home to my small apartment on Maple Street, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the case files spread across the surface. Financial records, bank statements, email communications. All the evidence that proved beyond any doubt that my sister was guilty of serious federal crimes. The same evidence that had convinced a federal judge to authorize raids and arrests. The same evidence that would likely send Veronica to prison for decades. But somehow, in my family's eyes, I was the villain in this story. I picked up my phone and started typing a text to my cousin Rachel, hoping that maybe one family member might be willing to listen to reason. Rachel had always been level-headed, less dramatic than Caroline or Jennifer. Maybe she would understand the impossible position I'd been put in. Rachel, I know you've probably heard about the situation with Veronica. I need you to know that this is the hardest thing I've ever had to deal with. I never wanted to be investigating my own sister. But when I discovered evidence of serious crimes, I couldn't just ignore it. Please try to understand that I didn't have a choice. I stared at the message for 10 minutes before hitting send. Within 5 minutes, I had my answer. Evelyn, I can't believe you would betray family like this. Veronica has always been there for us, and this is how you repay her? By destroying her life for your career? I'm disappointed in you. Don't contact me again until you're ready to make this right. I read that message 3 times, each reading making me feel more isolated and confused. How was telling the truth about crimes betraying family? How was doing my job professionally destroying her life for my career? How was I supposed to make this right when the evidence of Veronica's guilt was overwhelming and undeniable? I tried calling my college roommate Sarah, hoping for some perspective from someone outside the family. Sarah had known both Veronica and me for over a decade, had seen our relationship evolve over the years. Evelyn, I saw the news about Veronica, Sarah said when she answered. This must be incredibly difficult for you. Finally, someone who understood that this situation was painful for me too. It is, I said, feeling tears start to form. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Do you think I'm doing the right thing? My whole family thinks I'm betraying Veronica, but I discovered evidence of serious crimes. Was I supposed to just ignore it because she's my sister? There was a long pause on Sarah's end. Evelyn, can I ask you something? Is there any possibility that you might be, I don't know, maybe unconsciously motivated by sibling rivalry? You and Veronica have always had a complicated relationship. My heart sank. Even Sarah, who knew me better than almost anyone, was questioning my motives. You think I'm doing this out of jealousy? I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that family dynamics can be complicated, and sometimes we don't recognize our own biases. Veronica has always been the successful one, the one who had everything you wanted but couldn't afford. Maybe part of you was relieved to find something that brought her down to your level? I hung up without saying goodbye. If Sarah, someone who had seen firsthand how hard I worked, how dedicated I was to my principles, could suggest that I was motivated by jealousy rather than justice, then what hope did I have of convincing anyone else? I spent the next hour scrolling through social media, which turned out to be a terrible mistake. News of the Pinnacle Industries raids had broken nationally, and Veronica's name was mentioned in several articles as one of the key figures arrested. The comment sections were brutal, filled with people expressing outrage about corporate corruption and white-collar crime. But what really hurt were the posts from my extended family members. Cousin Jennifer had posted a long Facebook rant about how the media was destroying innocent people's lives with unproven allegations. Uncle Pete's wife had shared an article about prosecutorial overreach with the comment, "Some people in our own family should remember where their loyalties lie." Most painful was a post from my mother, praying for my daughter Veronica during this difficult time. Family should stick together, not tear each other apart. Some people have forgotten what loyalty means. The message was clear. I was no longer considered part of the family that deserved prayers or support. I was the outsider, the betrayer, the one who had forgotten what loyalty means. I closed my laptop and tried to think rationally about my situation. Was I crazy? Was I the villain that everyone seemed to think I was? I went back through everything that had happened, trying to find some angle I might have missed, some way I could have handled things differently. I could have recused myself from the investigation when I first learned it involved Pinnacle Industries. But that would have meant letting someone else handle a case I was uniquely qualified to investigate, and it might have delayed justice for the victims of Veronica's crimes. I could have warned Veronica that she was under investigation, but that would have been illegal. Obstruction of justice, tampering with evidence, Conspiracy after the fact. It would have made me a criminal, too. I could have stayed quiet about what I heard during her phone conversation in the hospital parking lot. But that would have meant letting her destroy evidence and escape prosecution while innocent people took the blame for her crimes. Every choice I'd made had been the ethical, legal, professional choice. But apparently in my family's eyes, ethics and legality and professionalism mattered less than blind loyalty to someone who had committed serious crimes. I picked up my phone and dialed Rebecca's number, hoping that my supervisor might be able to provide some perspective on this nightmare. "Evelyn, how are you holding up?" Rebecca asked when she answered. "I can only imagine how difficult this must be for you personally." "Rebecca, I need to ask you something. Do you think I did the right thing? My entire family is treating me like I'm the criminal in this situation. They're saying I betrayed my sister, that I'm jealous and ambitious and vindictive. Am I missing something? Is there some way I should have handled this differently?" Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "Evelyn, you've conducted this investigation with absolute professionalism and integrity. You've followed every protocol, respected every ethical boundary, and provided evidence that has helped expose a major criminal operation. You should be proud of the work you've done." "But my family—" "Your family is in shock," Rebecca interrupted gently. "They're dealing with the trauma of discovering that someone they loved and trusted was living a lie. It's easier for them to blame you than to accept that Veronica chose to become a criminal. That doesn't make their reaction right, but it does make it understandable. So what am I supposed to do? Just accept that I've lost my family over this? I think you need to give them time to process what's happened. Right now, they're in denial and looking for someone to blame. Eventually, they might come to understand that you were put in an impossible situation and made the only choice you could make. And if they don't, then you'll have to live with the knowledge that you did the right thing, even when it cost you everything. That's what integrity means, Evelyn. Sometimes doing the right thing comes with a price that seems too high to pay." After I hung up with Rebecca, I sat in my quiet apartment and tried to imagine my future. Would I spend holidays alone because my family couldn't forgive me for exposing Veronica's crimes? Would I lose relationships with cousins, aunts, uncles, all the extended family connections that had been part of my life since childhood? Would I become the family cautionary tale, the sister who chose career advancement over family loyalty? Would my name be whispered at family gatherings as an example of what happens when ambition corrupts someone's values? The irony was overwhelming. Veronica had actually chosen career advancement over family loyalty when she decided to commit crimes that would eventually destroy our family's reputation and unity. She had actually chosen ambition over values when she started laundering money for organized criminals. She had actually betrayed everything our family stood for when she built her lifestyle on theft and corruption. But somehow, I was the one being punished for those choices. I looked around my small, modest apartment. The same apartment that Veronica had always looked down on. The same living space that represented everything she found embarrassing about my life. The secondhand furniture, the discount store decorations, the practical choices that had always seemed so inferior to her designer lifestyle. But this apartment had been earned honestly. The furniture had been bought with money I'd earned through legitimate work. The decorations represented choices I'd made without compromising my principles or breaking any laws. Was I supposed to feel ashamed of that? Was I supposed to regret choosing integrity over wealth? Honesty over manipulation, justice over family loyalty? I picked up my phone one more time and typed a message that I sent to every family member who had condemned me. "I know you all think I betrayed Veronica, but I need you to understand something. I didn't choose to investigate my sister. I was assigned a case and discovered evidence of serious crimes. I could have compromised my professional integrity to protect her, but that would have made me a criminal too. I could have stayed silent and let innocent people be blamed for her crimes, but that would have made me complicit in injustice. I made the only choices I could make and still be able to look at myself in the mirror. I'm sorry that doing the right thing has torn our family apart. But I'm not sorry for refusing to become corrupt to protect someone who chose corruption over everything we were raised to believe in. I love you all, but I won't apologize for having integrity. I sent the message and then turned off my phone. Whatever responses came back, I wasn't ready to read them. I'd said what I needed to say, and now I had to find a way to live with the consequences of being the only person in my family who seemed to think that truth and justice mattered more than loyalty to criminals. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a small sense of peace. I was alone, but I was right. I had lost my family, but I had kept my soul. And maybe, in the end, that would have to be enough. 3 days after I sent that message to my family, I received an unexpected phone call from someone I'd never spoken to before. Derek Sullivan, the man Veronica had been talking to during that fateful phone conversation in the hospital parking lot. He was calling from the federal detention center where he was being held pending trial. Ms. Whitmore, my name is Derek Sullivan. I believe you know who I am. My blood ran cold. How did you get my number? Your sister gave it to me. I need to talk to you about something important. Something that might change how you feel about this entire situation. I'm not discussing anything with you. You're one of the criminals who... Please, Derek interrupted, his voice urgent. Just give me 5 minutes. There are things about your sister's involvement in this case that you don't understand. Things that might make you see her in a completely different light. Against my better judgment, I stayed on the line. You have 2 minutes. Veronica wasn't one of the masterminds of the money laundering operation. She was being blackmailed into participating. I almost hung up immediately. This sounded like exactly the kind of lie I'd expect from someone facing federal charges. That's ridiculous. 18 months ago, Veronica discovered that her supervisor, Marcus Chen, was embezzling funds from client accounts. She reported it to HR, thinking she was doing the right thing. But instead of investigating Chen, HR informed him about her complaint. Chen had connections to some very dangerous people who couldn't afford to have their financial arrangements exposed. Even if that's true, it is true, and I can prove it. Chen threatened to have Veronica killed if she didn't help expand the embezzlement into a full money laundering operation. He had photos of her apartment, her daily routine, your parents' address. He made it clear that her family would be targeted if she didn't cooperate. I felt a chill run down my spine. Why are you telling me this? Because Veronica has been trying to find a way out of this situation for over a year. She couldn't go to the police because Chen had corrupt contacts in local law enforcement. She couldn't quit her job because Chen made it clear that wouldn't protect her or her family. So she did the only thing she could think of. She started feeding information to federal investigators through anonymous tips, hoping they would eventually build a case strong enough to bring down the entire operation. That's impossible. Veronica was trying to control the investigation to protect herself. She was trying to control it to make sure the federal case was strong enough to take down Chen and his connections before they could retaliate against her family. Every piece of information she gave you was calculated to build towards a comprehensive takedown that would eliminate the threat to everyone she cared about. My mind was reeling. This version of events was so different from what I'd assumed that I could barely process it. Why should I believe you? Because I have recordings. Chen made the mistake of trying to blackmail me too, and I started documenting everything as insurance. I have audio recordings of him threatening your sister, threatening your family, explaining exactly how he would hurt people if anyone tried to expose the operation. Then why didn't you go to the authorities yourself? For the same reason Veronica couldn't. Chen had photographs and detailed surveillance information about my family too. We were all trapped in this situation, forced to participate in crimes we never wanted to commit. Derek's voice cracked slightly. Ms. Whitmore, your sister has been living in terror for 18 months. Every day she was afraid that Chen would decide she knew too much and have her eliminated. Every night she was afraid that someone would break into your parents' house or follow you home from work. She wasn't living some glamorous criminal lifestyle. She was living a nightmare. The expensive clothes, the designer purchases, the luxury lifestyle. Window dressing. Chen insisted that everyone in the operation maintain appearances of success and prosperity. If Veronica had suddenly started living modestly, it would have raised suspicions about her loyalty to the operation. She was required to spend money on visible luxuries to maintain her cover. I sank into a chair, my legs suddenly weak. This can't be true. It is true, and here's the part that's going to be hardest for you to hear. Veronica specifically used your license plate number as her anonymous signature because she trusted you completely. She knew that if anything happened to her, if Chen decided to eliminate her before the investigation was complete, you would be able to connect the dots and make sure the right people were held accountable. She was protecting me by keeping me in the dark. She was protecting you by making sure you could never be accused of being complicit in the investigation. If you had known she was the anonymous source, you would have been required to recuse yourself from the case. The investigation would have been handed to someone else, someone who might not have understood the urgency of the situation or the danger everyone was facing. I felt sick. Why didn't she just tell me the truth? Because Chen had people monitoring communications of everyone involved in the operation. If Veronica had contacted you directly, if there had been any evidence of collusion between you two, Chen would have killed both of you without hesitation. The only way to keep you safe was to keep you completely ignorant of her role in bringing down the operation. Derek paused, and I could hear voices in the background of wherever he was calling from. Ms. Whitmore, your sister sacrificed her relationship with her family to protect them. She let you hate her, let you think she was a greedy criminal, let you participate in building a case against her, all because it was the only way to ensure that Chen and his associates would be arrested before they could retaliate. Then why is she being charged if she was being blackmailed? Because she still participated in financial crimes, even if it was under duress. The federal prosecutors are required to charge everyone who was involved, regardless of the circumstances. But they're also considering the evidence of coercion as a mitigating factor. Veronica's cooperation with the investigation through her anonymous tips will likely reduce her sentence significantly. What about the Meridian Group connections? The organized crime aspects? That was all Chen and his associates. Veronica never had direct contact with any organized crime figures. She was deliberately kept isolated from that part of the operation to minimize her knowledge and her usefulness as a potential witness against the higher-level criminals. I was struggling to process this completely different version of events. According to Derek, Veronica hadn't been a greedy criminal who chose corruption over family. She'd been a victim who sacrificed everything to protect her family while secretly working to bring down the criminals who had threatened them. Derek, if this is all true, why didn't Veronica tell me any of this during our confrontation at the hospital? Why did she act like she was proud of her criminal lifestyle? Because even then, she wasn't sure the operation had been completely dismantled. Chen had associates who weren't arrested in the initial raids, people who might still pose a threat if they learned that Veronica had been the anonymous source. She had to maintain her cover as a reluctant participant, rather than reveal herself as the person who brought down the entire operation. What about her comments about my car, my lifestyle, my lack of ambition? Derek sighed heavily. She told me about that conversation. She said it was the hardest thing she'd ever done, insulting you like that. But she was trying to make you hate her so completely that you would never be tempted to dig deeper into her motivations. She was afraid that if you suspected she was actually trying to do the right thing, you might do something that would put yourself in danger. I sat in stunned silence, trying to reconcile this version of Veronica with the woman I'd been hating for weeks. How do I know you're not lying to me? I'm sending you a package, audio recordings, email communications, financial documents that prove everything I've told you. Judge for yourself whether the evidence supports my story or the version you've been believing. Why are you giving me this information? Because Veronica asked me to. She said that once the immediate danger was over, once Chen and his associates were safely in custody, she wanted her family to know the truth about what really happened. She wanted you to understand that everything she did was to protect the people she loved. The call ended, and I sat in my apartment staring at my phone, my entire understanding of the situation crumbling around me. If Derek was telling the truth, then Veronica hadn't been a greedy criminal who manipulated me for personal gain. She'd been a victim who risked everything to protect our family while secretly orchestrating the downfall of the criminals who had threatened us. If Derek was telling the truth, then I had spent weeks hating my sister for choosing corruption over family, when she had actually chosen family over everything else, including her own safety and freedom. If Derek was telling the truth, then Veronica's greatest crime had been loving us enough to sacrifice herself to keep us safe. But I wouldn't know whether Derek was telling the truth until I received the evidence he'd promised to send. Until then, I was trapped between two completely contradictory versions of my sister: the greedy criminal I'd been investigating and the heroic victim who'd been protecting us all along. One thing was certain: nothing about this situation was as simple as I'd believed. 2 days later, I was sitting in my office going through Derek's evidence package when Rebecca knocked on my cubicle wall. She looked exhausted, and there was something in her expression that I couldn't quite read. Part concern, part frustration, part resignation. "Evelyn, we need to talk." "My office now?" I followed her down the hallway, the manila envelope containing Derek's recordings and documents clutched in my hands. I'd spent the previous 48 hours listening to audio files that had turned my understanding of this entire situation upside down. If the recordings were authentic and our technical analysis suggested they were, then Derek's version of events was largely accurate. "Sit down," Rebecca said, closing her office door behind us. "We have a problem. Actually, we have several problems, and they all involve your family situation. Rebecca, I need to tell you about some new evidence I've received. About Derek Sullivan's recordings? About Marcus Chen's blackmail scheme? About your sister being coerced into participating in the money laundering operation?" Rebecca interrupted. "Yeah, I know about all of that." I stared at her in surprise. "How do you know?" "Because Agent Catherine Morrison from the FBI Financial Crimes Task Force briefed me this morning. Apparently, there are significant aspects of this case that we weren't informed about during the initial investigation." Rebecca sat down heavily in her chair and rubbed her temples. "Evelyn, I need you to understand something. The federal investigation into Pinnacle Industries has been running parallel to our state investigation for almost 6 months. The FBI has been tracking the Meridian Group's money laundering activities, and they've been aware of the coercion and blackmail elements from the beginning." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that we were essentially providing cover for a much larger federal operation. Our investigation into the embezzlement scheme gave the FBI time to build their case against the organized crime connections without alerting the criminals that they were under surveillance. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet, so our entire investigation was real but limited in scope. We were investigating legitimate crimes, but we weren't seeing the full picture. The FBI was deliberately compartmentalizing information to protect their larger operation and to protect the safety of people like your sister who were being coerced into cooperation." Rebecca pulled out a thick file folder and placed it on her desk. "Agent Morrison provided me with the complete case file this morning. Do you want to know what we weren't told?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure I was ready for more revelations. "Marcus Chen has been under FBI surveillance for 18 months. They have recordings of him threatening your sister, threatening your family, threatening other employees who discovered his illegal activities. They have photographic evidence of surveillance he conducted on your parents' house, your apartment, even your workplace." My blood ran cold. "They have photos of my apartment?" "Multiple photos. Chen had your daily routine documented down to the minute. He knew where you worked, where you shopped, where you went for coffee. Evelyn, If your sister hadn't cooperated with his demands, there's a very real possibility that you and your parents would have been targeted for violence. I sank deeper into my chair, trying to process this information. Why didn't the FBI warn us? Because any unusual changes in your behavior might have alerted Chen that law enforcement was closing in. The safest approach was to let everyone continue their normal routines while building the case in the background. Rebecca opened the file folder and pulled out several photographs. These were taken by Chen's associates over the past year. The photos were surveillance shots of me leaving my apartment, walking to my car, entering the state auditor's office building. There were also photos of my parents' house, detailed shots of their daily routines, images of them working in their garden and checking their mail. Chen made sure your sister saw these photos, Rebecca continued. He wanted her to understand exactly what would happen to her family if she didn't cooperate with his expansion of the embezzlement scheme into money laundering. So Veronica really was protecting us. According to the FBI's assessment, yes. But here's where it gets complicated, Evelyn. Your sister wasn't just a victim in this situation. She was also an active collaborator with federal law enforcement. Rebecca pulled out another document. 6 months after Chen started blackmailing her, Veronica contacted the FBI directly. She agreed to continue participating in the money laundering operation as an informant, providing federal agents with real-time intelligence about the scope of the criminal enterprise. I stared at the document, which appeared to be some kind of cooperation agreement signed by Veronica and witnessed by federal agents. She was working with the FBI this entire time? Not just working with them, she was one of their primary sources. The FBI has recordings of over 200 conversations between your sister and various criminals involved in the operation. She was wearing a wire for months, gathering evidence that will be used to prosecute dozens of people connected to the Meridian Group. Then why was she arrested with everyone else? Because her cover had to be maintained until the very end. If the other criminals had realized that Veronica was an FBI informant, they would have killed her immediately. Even now, with most of the operation dismantled, there are still associates of the Meridian Group who might target her if they learn about her cooperation with law enforcement. Rebecca leaned forward in her chair. Evelyn, your sister has been in witness protection preparation for 3 months. After her sentencing, and she will receive a significantly reduced sentence due to her cooperation, she'll be relocated with a new identity to protect her from retaliation. The implications of this hit me like a physical blow. She's going to disappear completely? Most likely, yes. The FBI considers the threat to her safety to be ongoing and substantial. Even with most of the criminal network dismantled, there are enough loose ends that permanent relocation is probably the safest option. I felt tears starting to form in my eyes. So I'll never see her again? That depends on several factors that haven't been determined yet. But, Evelyn, there's something else you need to know. Something that Agent Morrison specifically asked me to tell you. Rebecca's expression softened slightly. Your sister specifically requested that you not be informed about her cooperation with the FBI during the investigation. She was afraid that if you knew the truth, you might inadvertently compromise her safety or the safety of your family. She was protecting me again. She was protecting everyone. But she also asked Agent Morrison to make sure that you received a full briefing on her actual role in this operation once it was safe to do so. She wanted you to understand that everything she did, including letting you believe she was a criminal, was motivated by her desire to protect the people she loved. Rebecca reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope. She also asked me to give you this. I took the envelope with shaking hands. My name was written on the front in Veronica's familiar handwriting. Evelyn, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Now that you know the truth about your sister's situation, do you still believe she should be prosecuted for the crimes she committed under duress? The question caught me off guard. I don't know. She was being blackmailed, but she still participated in money laundering. She was protecting our family, but she still broke federal laws. That's exactly the dilemma that prosecutors are facing. Veronica clearly committed crimes, but the circumstances under which she committed them create significant mitigating factors. Her cooperation with law enforcement has been extensive and valuable, but that doesn't erase the illegal activities she participated in. Rebecca stood up and walked to her window, looking out at the parking lot where my Honda Civic was parked among dozens of other government employee vehicles. There's one more thing, Evelyn, something that might influence how you feel about this entire situation. What now? The anonymous tips that started our investigation, the ones that used your license plate number as a signature, those weren't actually sent by your sister. I felt the world tilt sideways again. What do you mean? Your sister was feeding information to the FBI through official channels. She wasn't sending anonymous tips to our office. Someone else was using your license plate number to communicate with us. Who? Rebecca turned back to face me. That's what Agent Morrison is trying to figure out. Someone with knowledge of both your sister's situation and your role in our office has been manipulating our investigation from the beginning. Someone who wanted to ensure that state and federal investigations would eventually converge, creating maximum pressure on the criminal network. But who would have access to all that information? That's the question that's keeping federal investigators awake at night. Because whoever it was, they knew details about your family, about your sister's coercion, about the FBI operation, and about our investigation procedures. They were playing a very sophisticated game with multiple law enforcement agencies. Rebecca sat back down and looked directly at me. Evelyn, there's a possibility that someone in your own family has been orchestrating parts of this investigation without anyone realizing it. That's impossible. Is it? Think about who would have known your license plate number, who would have understood the significance of using it as an anonymous identifier, who would have had enough knowledge of your work to know exactly how to format tips that would be taken seriously by our office. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized what Rebecca was suggesting. You think someone in my family knew about Veronica's situation and was trying to help her? I think someone in your family is a lot more informed about this entire situation than they've been letting on, and I think it's time you found out who. I drove straight from Rebecca's office to the hospital, Veronica's unopened letter on the passenger seat of my Honda Civic, and my mind racing with questions about which family member could possibly have been manipulating our investigation. When I arrived at Dad's room, I found him sitting up in bed, looking stronger than he had since his heart attack, deep in conversation with my mother. They both looked up when I entered, and I was surprised to see something in Dad's expression that I hadn't seen in weeks: clarity, determination, and what looked almost like relief. "Evelyn," he said, his voice stronger than it had been since the surgery, "I was hoping you'd come by today. We need to have a conversation, all of us." "Dad, I have something important to tell you both about Veronica's situation, about how she was being blackmailed by Marcus Chen, about how she's been working with the FBI as an informant, about how she sacrificed everything to protect our family." Dad interrupted quietly. I stared at him in shock. "How do you know about that?" Mom and Dad exchanged a look that seemed to contain years of unspoken communication. Then Dad reached into the drawer of his bedside table and pulled out a small digital recorder. "Because I'm the one who's been sending anonymous tips to your office for the past 8 months. The room went completely silent except for the steady beeping of Dad's heart monitor. I felt like all the air had been sucked out of my lungs. "What?" "I knew something was wrong with Veronica's situation almost from the beginning," Dad said, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "The sudden wealth, the expensive clothes, the way she acted nervous whenever anyone asked specific questions about her work. But more than that, I knew my daughter. The Veronica who raised money for charity in high school, who cried when she accidentally stepped on a spider, who used to give her lunch money to kids who couldn't afford to eat. That girl didn't suddenly become a greedy criminal. Mom nodded, tears streaming down her face. We started watching her more carefully during family gatherings. The way she flinched when her phone rang, the way she checked over her shoulder in parking lots, the way she always seemed afraid of something. "So you investigated her?" I asked, still trying to process this revelation. "We hired a private investigator," Dad admitted. "Someone your mother's brother Pete recommended through his security connections. It took 3 months, but we eventually discovered that Veronica was being threatened, that there were photos of our house, of you, of all of us." I sank into the visitor's chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. "You've known this whole time?" "We've known that Veronica was in danger and that she was trying to protect us," Mom said. "But we didn't know about her cooperation with the FBI until much later. That's when your father made the decision to start sending tips to your office." Dad leaned forward, his expression intense. "Evelyn, I used your license plate number because I needed the tips to be taken seriously, but I also needed them to be traced back to you eventually. I knew that if anything happened to Veronica, if the criminals decided to eliminate her before law enforcement could build their case, you would be the one person with the skills and the access to put all the pieces together. You were manipulating my investigation. I was trying to ensure that the investigation would succeed in time to save our family," Dad corrected. "The FBI was building their case methodically, but methodically meant slowly. I was afraid that Chen and his associates would realize Veronica was cooperating and kill her before the arrests could be made." Mom reached over and took my hand. "We're so sorry we couldn't tell you the truth, sweetheart. But if you had known that we were feeding you information, you would have been required to recuse yourself from the case. The investigation would have been handed to someone else, someone who might not have understood how urgent the situation was." "So everyone was protecting me by lying to me," I said, feeling a mixture of gratitude and resentment. "Everyone was protecting everyone by making incredibly difficult choices," Dad replied. "Your sister chose to let her family hate her, rather than risk our safety. We chose to manipulate your investigation rather than risk Veronica's life. You chose to pursue justice, even when it meant prosecuting your own sister. None of us had good options, Evelyn. We all just did the best we could with impossible situations." I looked at my parents, really looked at them, and realized how much they had aged over the past months. The stress of knowing their daughter was in mortal danger, of having to pretend they believed she was a criminal while secretly working to save her life, had taken a visible toll on both of them. What about the rest of the family? Caroline, Jennifer, everyone who blamed me for betraying Veronica? Dad's expression darkened. "They don't know the truth yet. We couldn't risk telling them because the more people who knew about Veronica's real situation, the greater the chance that information would leak back to Chen's associates. But now that the immediate danger is over, now we have to figure out how to rebuild our family relationships," Mom finished. "Starting with helping everyone understand that you were never the villain in this story." I pulled out Veronica's letter and stared at it for a moment before opening it. The handwriting was shaky, as if she'd written it while under extreme stress. "Evelyn, if you're reading this, it means the FBI has finally told you the truth about what's been happening. I need you to know that every cruel thing I said to you, every insult about your car and your life and your choices, was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I needed you to hate me completely, so that you would never be tempted to dig deeper into my situation and put yourself in danger. For 18 months, I've lived in terror that Chen would decide our family knew too much and have all of us killed. Every day, I was afraid I'd come home to find that something had happened to you or Mom and Dad. The only thing that kept me going was knowing that my cooperation with law enforcement would eventually end this nightmare. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you the truth. I'm sorry I let you think I was a greedy criminal who chose money over family. I'm sorry you had to participate in building a case against me without knowing that I wanted to be caught, that I needed to be arrested, so that this whole operation would finally be exposed. Most of all, I'm sorry that doing the right thing cost both of us so much. You lost your family's respect for telling the truth about crimes you discovered. I lost my family's love by committing crimes to protect them. Maybe that's just what happens when good people are forced into impossible situations by bad people. I don't know if I'll ever see you again after sentencing. The FBI says witness protection might be permanent, that the threat from Chen's remaining associates might never fully disappear. But I need you to know that everything I did was worth it if it kept you safe. Take care of Mom and Dad. Try to forgive the family members who blamed you. They were just trying to cope with a situation they didn't understand. And remember that your Honda Civic represents everything that's good about you: practicality, honesty, making choices based on your values instead of other people's expectations. I love you, little sister. I'm proud of the person you've become, and I'm grateful that your integrity made it possible to bring down the people who threatened our family. Veronica. I read the letter twice before looking up at my parents, who were watching me with expressions of concern and hope. So what happens now? I asked. Now we wait, Dad said. Veronica's sentencing is scheduled for next month. The prosecutor has recommended a reduced sentence due to her cooperation, but she'll still serve some time in federal prison before entering witness protection. And our family? We'll heal eventually, Mom said with cautious optimism. It won't be easy and it won't be quick. Some relationships may never fully recover. But now that we can tell people the truth about what really happened, maybe we can start to rebuild. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my Honda Civic outside the federal courthouse, where Veronica was sentenced to 18 months in prison, followed by permanent witness protection. The sentence was lighter than it could have been, thanks to her extensive cooperation with law enforcement. But it still means that my sister, the person who sacrificed everything to protect our family, will spend the next year and a half in federal prison before disappearing forever. The family barbecue that started this entire nightmare feels like it happened in another lifetime. The sister who mocked my poverty mobile and called me unambitious turned out to be the person who loved me enough to destroy her own life to keep me safe. The investigation I thought I was conducting turned out to be orchestrated by my own father to protect a daughter who was already risking everything to bring down the criminals who threatened us. Most of our extended family eventually came to understand the truth about Veronica's situation, and most of them apologized for blaming me for her downfall. But some relationships were permanently damaged by the crisis. Caroline still insists that Veronica should have found another way, and that I should have tried harder to protect her. Jennifer moved across the country and rarely speaks to any of us anymore. Dad recovered fully from his heart attack, though doctors say the stress of Veronica's situation probably contributed to his cardiac event. Mom has started seeing a therapist to help her process the trauma of knowing her daughter was in mortal danger for over a year. As for me, I received a commendation from the state auditor's office for my work on the Pinnacle Industries case, and I was recently promoted to senior investigator. But the recognition feels hollow when I think about the personal cost of that success. Sometimes I wonder if there was another way this could have played out. If we had all been honest with each other from the beginning, if we had trusted each other with the truth, could we have found a solution that didn't require Veronica to sacrifice her entire future? Could we have protected our family without destroying it in the process? But then I remember Chen's surveillance photos of our daily routines, and I realized that there probably wasn't a perfect solution to an imperfect situation. Sometimes good people are forced to make terrible choices by circumstances beyond their control. Sometimes doing the right thing requires sacrificing everything you care about. Sometimes love means letting people hate you to keep them safe. I still drive my Honda Civic, and I'm still proud of what it represents. But now when I look at it, I don't just see my practical choices and modest lifestyle. I see the license plate that my father used to save my sister's life. I see the car that my sister mocked while she was secretly dying inside from the stress of protecting our family. I see a symbol of all the complicated ways that people show love for each other, even when that love looks like betrayal from the outside. Veronica was right about one thing. My Honda Civic does represent everything that's good about me. But it also represents everything that's complicated about family, loyalty, justice, and the price we pay for doing what we believe is right. 2 weeks ago, I received a single postcard with no return address. It showed a picture of mountains and contained just 4 words: "Still driving responsibly. Natus V." I don't know where my sister is now, or what her new life looks like, or whether I'll ever hear from her again. But I know that somewhere, under a new name with a new identity, she's probably still making practical choices and putting other people's safety ahead of her own comfort. And I know that every time I start my reliable, modest, completely paid-for Honda Civic, I'm honoring the memory of a sister who loved her family enough to let them think she was a criminal while she was actually saving their lives. Sometimes the people who look like villains are actually heroes, and sometimes the people who look like heroes are actually just doing their jobs. But sometimes, in the most complicated situations, everyone is both victim and perpetrator, both hero and villain, both right and wrong at the same time. That's the truth about family, about justice, and about the impossible choices people make when they're trying to protect the people they love. It's messier than any story you see in movies, more complicated than any case I've ever investigated, and more painful than any betrayal I've ever experienced. But it's also more beautiful than I ever imagined love could be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.